Naya, mom, boob nerd, board-certified lactation consultant, and lover of lipstick and curse words. I'm that weird Indian girl you knew in high school, all grown up.
And I'm Alexis, mom, birth nerd, and therapist plus doula, encouraging parents to hold joy plus what the fuck is this mess simultaneously. Some people think I'm too much, but those aren't my people.
And we are the Top Knot Squad.
TKS is a tiny little podcast about motherhood in real life, the good, the bad, the ugly AF.
Hosted by two women that are passionate about our beliefs and unafraid to speak our minds.
Friends that wanted to create space for all that ish we are too scared to talk about.
Are you ready to laugh, be vulnerable, and keep it real with us?
Top knots are not required.
If the Top Knot Squad content makes you laugh, nod in agreement, or makes you feel less alone, we'd love your support in the cost of producing this podcast. Visit patreon.com/TopKnotSquad to learn more about our budget-friendly sponsorship tiers and how you can help ensure that TKS has a future. Every little bit helps. On today's episode, we will be discussing how much racism blows. It's a hard conversation, but lives are on the line and being complicit just isn't an option. While your TKS ladies are on their own path of unlearning, we approach it from different backgrounds, angles, and privileges. Our guest, Heather Gallagher, will speak about her childhood as the child of a deaf adult and the challenges she has dealt with. Heather's upbringing plays a huge role in why she is actively anti-racist and has been doing the work. We will also unravel some of the ways in which we contribute to harm. Part 2 of this episode will discuss how the fuck to engage in repair, so stay tuned to hear more soon. Here's a little about our guest, Heather. Heather Gallagher is a Chinese-American full-spectrum doula and photojournalist providing support for and documenting individuals and families from birth to death. Heather is a CODA, child of deaf adult, and began using photography as a young child as a simplified and exact way to communicate with her mother, who is a deaf Chinese immigrant with limited ASL and English language comprehension. She continues to use it as a tool to tell universal and personal stories from across the spectrum of life experiences. Heather's clients range widely from individual and family commissions that last years documenting their lives to small businesses and Fortune 500 companies worldwide, humanizing brands and missions. In 2019, she became a birth, postpartum, and death doula, and with each client, calls on her unique life experiences and perspectives to create a non-judgmental and inclusive experience that allows the individual or family to fully experience whatever life transition they're going through in an emotionally safe environment. Welcome, Heather. We're so happy to have you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. And gosh, hearing it back, I'm like, that was a mouthful. I apologize.
You have quite the resume / bio / all of it. No, we got to talk you up. Are you kidding?
I'm usually used to apologizing for like the length of my name because it's like Heather Gallagher photography. Like it's so long. And I don't know. I'm always trying to be anyways, but yeah.
No, you're worth celebrating. So
absolutely.
Very sweet. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me and for your time and your presence.
Oh gosh, thank you for your time and presence.
Yeah, of course.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm realizing last episode we didn't do what the fuck yeah.
Yeah, I thought that while I was writing the notes too.
Yeah. We've started a kind of intro just to lighten the mood. So if there's any what the fuck or fuck yeah from your day, week, month, hour that you want to share, we can each take turns sharing something.
Yeah, I love that. I love this idea. So gosh, yeah, I was trying to think about it. Oh, I mean, honestly, today my fuck yeah would be the Derek Chauvin trial and the guilty on all counts. Gosh, what's the word? Hearing? Verdict. Thank you. What are words? So that's great. You know, obviously, the circumstances are horrific. But that, verdict was, yeah, that was a fuck yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. A what the fuck? Everything else. Literally everything and anything else. I mean, God, who knows, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. What about you guys?
Oh.
I have a fuck yeah, but only because I scheduled my hair appointment
Oh,
like 6
yeah.
weeks in
Yeah, your hair
advance.
is a
So
total fuck yeah.
I got a cut and a color, and you can't see it, people who are listening at home, but trust me when I say it looks really fucking good.
I see it too. It looks really good. I co-sign that.
Yeah.
So that's my fuck yeah, but that's really about it. It was my day off from work, and I spent half the day in the hair salon, which was kind of nice. I did 100% fall asleep at the shampoo bowl while they were massaging my head, and then like they had to tone it, so they had to put stuff in my hair and just kind of leave me. And I think I snored and woke myself up. So.
That's the, signs of a really good deep sleep. If you're
For
snoring.
sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess that's my what the fuck is I'm not getting sleep right now, which when do I ever have anything different to report?
Well, you have a baby. It's, it's expected.
I actually was just talking to somebody about that. I don't remember who, but I'm like, I probably should care about sleep training in some capacity because he's almost a year old. But he doesn't like just fuss. Like it's like 0 to 1,000. Like his cries are like shrill, and like when you look at the monitor, he's like reaching his hand towards the door and like desperation of like,
your
save me.
Dramatic.
Yeah, he's very dramatic. So I can't do it. So here we are.
Yeah.
So anyways,
I feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I failed at sleep training too.
So did I.
Yeah.
Clients are always like, so talk to me about sleep. I'm like, no, I'm really the worst person to ask because I just brought my babies into bed with me and that's how we fixed it. So
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, a nice little, entry into a heavy, a little pause before a heavy convo. So yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about your story and kind of how your lived experience has, brought us here today to talk about anti-racism and privilege?
Yeah, totally. There's the really long version, which I'll not go into, but the long and short of it essentially is, my parents are, okay, so my mom is a deaf Chinese immigrant. She was born in the 40s in Beijing, in China. And she was born she was born hearing, and she was born into poverty. And at the age of 3 or 4, the war was going on in China. And so her and her family had to flee to Taiwan. And so because of a lot of circumstances, she was just really vulnerable, and she contracted tuberculosis, and became what is known as profoundly deaf. And so that is essentially the most deaf one can be. And so no interventions would be useful. So there's no hearing aids, cochlear implants, et cetera, wouldn't do anything for her. And she was born the second oldest out of ultimately 5 children. So she had 3 more siblings born after that, all boys. So she's the only girl. So if you lay out the stats, she's the only girl, only deaf person in the 40s in China, in Taiwan, but in a Chinese culture family. And so therefore she was severely neglected in all the ways, right? So she wasn't she wasn't physically abandoned by her family, but she was emotionally abandoned. She was, she was deprived in education until she was about 12 years old because they literally didn't know what to do with her. And so she helped out around the house, and she cooked and cleaned and basically helped my grandma with taking care of the family. They were homeless for quite a while, on and off. And so squatted in graveyards, sold street art, etc. I don't really know exactly what happened, but basically when they kind of got back on their feet and everything, my grandparents were able to eventually send her away to deaf school, which is a pretty common practice with deaf children. It's to go to, the options are either you mainstream them, which is the term where you put them into a hearing school and the child basically just tries to survive in that environment, with or without resources. And then and then the other option is you send them to a deaf school. And so she went to an all deaf school, and essentially started kindergarten, like what we understand as kindergarten, her first, formal education at the age of 12. And she hadn't acquired any sign language until that point because her whole family was hearing. They didn't have any reason prior to her becoming deaf learning sign language. They didn't need to. And so her means of communication within her family were to write notes back and forth to each other in Chinese, or she basically learned how to lip read if you were speaking in Chinese, right? Because they did. And so her and her brothers, though, because they're siblings and they're kids, they all kind of invented their own language, right? Which is sweet. And it was to varying degrees, depending on how close they were, et cetera, because she's one of the older ones. But so they all, and, their language was more hand shaped, so sign language based. But it wasn't rooted in any real sign language, right? Real as in like widely understood sign language. And so they had their own secret language there, which is typically known. That's a really common practice within deaf households. And really, it's a common practice between any groups of people, right? You develop your own slang, essentially, a comfortable language where it's not known to other people, but you guys understand it. It could be seen as like, it's equivalent basically of like an inside joke and nobody else understands it, anyways. And so they had that. Those were her modes of communication. So all of that is context for how I grew up. Okay, so hold on. Let me back up. That's my mom. And my dad is a hearing white American man and was, born, raised in America, in Massachusetts, and then Maryland, and eventually went off into the Navy. And that is how they met, when my dad was in the Navy and stationed abroad. My mom was in Taiwan. He was in Taiwan. Well, meet cute. And lots of language barriers because my mom at that point, she was a full grown woman. And so she knew sign language at that point, but she knew Chinese and Taiwanese sign, which are their own languages. And my dad knew very basic levels of, he's that guy who's like, oh, I know sign language. My name is, so, very basic levels of American Sign Language, which is its own language. But longer story, not so long, but definitely not short, is, they met and their modes of communication were so crude because they were speaking completely different languages to each other. But they ended up dating long distance and, I'm here now. They got together. They're still together. They just had their 40th wedding anniversary and it's very sweet. Yes. And they are very much in love. And to this day, they don't really speak the same language, but they both will very cheesily say they speak the language of love. And then that's when I'm like, oh, barf, bye, So that is the setup, right? So my brother and I have an older brother. He's 3 years older. We were born in Maryland, where my parents eventually settled down and had us just outside of Washington, D.C. And the first neighborhood and house that we lived in was in a deaf community. So it's kind of this like unofficial little pocket where the majority of the households and businesses are deaf. And so by that means, you could just have like one person in the household that's deaf. And so that was the case in our house. There are other houses where everybody was deaf, varying levels, etc. The church we went to, everybody was deaf, etc. And so we were born into that environment. But since my mom had immigrated to America not very long before my brother was born, so basically my brother, mom, dad, and I all took American Sign Language classes together from when my brother and I were at a young age. And my dad and mom started them before we were born, but like we all took them either together or individually, and we would take them at Gallaudet, which is the big deaf school in DC. And so that all brought us up to like somewhat of the same comprehension of the same language, but it's all varied, right? Because language acquisition is so different for children versus being an adult. And so there's all these barriers there. Because of all of those barriers, right? It was complicated trying to all just communicate clearly. And so, so much of the work that I do and so much of just who I am is really trying to communicate on a really human level with folks. Because that is something that I really like. It's not just like it was a survival skill for me, and so in doing that, you have to cut away a lot of the bullshit, right? Yeah. And you have to be very direct, very blunt, which, deaf culture in itself is very blunt. Chinese culture is very blunt. And so I had that like inherently, but like, if you don't literally speak the same language, you got to figure out how to make it work. And so for me, photography became that bridge of trying to find a exact, just like this simplified way of getting my thoughts across. And that evolved into, that started off as self-portraiture, literally trying to storyboard what I was saying to my mom at, because I was a latchkey kid and she went back to work, et cetera. And I would leave notes on the table in Polaroid form for her to know what I was doing after school so she wouldn't freak out, because this was before cell phones and pager and all of that. But even if those technologies were still around, she wouldn't have been able to use them because she doesn't know English, she can't speak, et cetera. And so it was my creative way of trying to bridge that gap. And so then what the evolution of that was, portraiture rather, into family portraits of my family, because I was like, I just needed to, I don't know, just kind of dissect things and understand them. That turned into portraits of other people's families because I was that girl with the camera. And that turned into, what I do now, which is essentially still portraits of other people's families. But the root of all of that is to really try to get us all down, to strip all of this nonsense, like, I don't know, we can get more into it because it's anti-racism work really speaks to like stripping away this need for perfection and this need for a certain presentation. And it's just like, let's get down to facts, right? And that's why documentary work speaks to me so much, because it's just the real,
No, keep going with that, because our next question for you was, what led you to do the work to become anti-racist and to dissect your own privilege, and how did all of this begin?
So yeah, that's really literally the genesis of all of that. And so in terms of like, I got, so in reality, I've been doing this work of anti-racism my whole life, right? Just by surviving in itself as an act of being anti-racist, is an act of living in a white supremacist world, society. And the fact that I've lived and survived and thrived in it is my own act of defiance, right? But being biracial, half white, I am in that position of having to, both protect myself as an Asian woman, but then also be outspoken about things and be actively working against these systems that I also benefit from, right? And so that also speaks to the dynamic of being just biracial in general. But so for me, because of all of these identities I hold, being a biracial person who, in a lot of cases, passes for white, there's some people, whatever, that's the whole thing with, I shouldn't speak for all biracial people, but, so often it's like, oh, what are you? And so there's this like kind of, what's the word?
Ambiguity.
What's that?
Ambiguity. I don't know.
Thank you. I was like, androgyny? No. Starts with an A. Yeah, there's this racial ambiguity to me, right? And so, but my name's Heather Gallagher. That's my given name, not my married name. Like, I have a super white name. I have a super, I sound white because I don't have an accent because my mom's deaf. And so I don't have a Chinese accent. I don't speak the language. I don't speak Chinese. I do Chinese sign language, but like people like that doesn't register to people, and, I grew up in Maryland and, anyways, what I'm trying to say is, so there's those identities. And then I have the identity of being, I say half deaf, half hearing. Obviously I'm full hearing, but I have the culture of deaf culture, which is its own world, right? And has its own cultural norms and language, that is in me too. And so I've always seen myself as this like Trojan horse of sorts where I can pass for so many things. I can pass for Asian, I can pass for white, I can pass for deaf, I can pass for hearing. And so because of that ability to pass, I have bore witness to things, right? That I think that, and from a very young age, right? That have just been shocking to me. And I think that if it wasn't for, so like, I want to be a little bit more specific. So like, as a young child who is the hearing interpreter for her deaf brown mom, right? We go to the grocery store and, from age 4, I'm the interpreter, and we're in line at the grocery store and, whatever, we're just in line. Me and my mom were talking. There's no reason for me to be using my voice because I'm out with a deaf person. So I'm just signing. So everybody around me just thinks I'm deaf. Like, I can hear people saying terrible shit about either my mom, about me, because they think I'm deaf and I can't hear them. And, it can be anything from like, oh, that poor family, because automatically there's pity on us because we're deaf. Or, that poor girl, and I'm that poor girl because like, this is my mom. Or, I can hear somebody talking about the Black person who's in line with us and like under their breath. And I'm just like, and I just want to scream, I can fucking hear you. Do you hear yourself? And there have been times like when I was older where I'd just turn around and I'd comment back and like people would be like, oh, holy shit. And, there's the backtracking and everything. But because I have that ability to code switch to not just in my language, but like how I look to people, it has been like, I'm not surprised by anything, and I haven't been surprised by anything in a very long time. Like all of this systemic racism and just great imbalance of power, I've witnessed that since I was so little, and I've known the realities of that, right? And so this anti-racism work, I do it all the time, but I am way more public about it now. Because, sure, social media is this tool that allows everyone to be more public. But realistically, I've been doing it in my life, in my inner circles forever. But I'm becoming more known for it now. And that could probably it could be for a lot of reasons. I've probably pissed a lot of people off, but like, that's part of the work, right? And it's not like my goal isn't to piss people off, but if that happens, what I've learned is you're doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've struck a chord or a nerve or brought something to the surface.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, was like just the rupture that happens in this work, like which is like the opposite of the goal, really.
Exactly.
Right?
Like, right. Everyone's like, oh my God, there's so much division. There's so much division.
Yeah,
and it's like, sure, yeah, that division's been there a long ass time. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Then as soon as you want to talk about it, people are like, oh, well, I mean, what do you want me to do about it?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, well,
yeah. No,
hold
totally.
on, you know?
Yeah. And the division is like, just because you're facing something uncomfortable and you're, you know, laying really like, just, I don't know, like it ruptures your whole system, really. Like the work is like totally undoing and putting back together, and it's lifelong. And the division is from people running away from doing that. Like it's
Absolutely.
not they
are creating the bigger space.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, because they're leaving.
Yes.
They're leaving.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I have experienced many ruptures, right? And you know, that is unfortunately / fortunately, because the way I see it, right, it's a double-sided, I don't know, what's the rest of that saying?
Double-sided sword? Isn't it a sword?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, coin?
Double-edged sword.
Oh,
yeah.
Talk. It's
to anybody
sword,
listening,
right?
we can't talk today. No.
I cannot talk today. Yeah, because, you know, it's like, well, was that somebody I really wanted to be in a relationship with anyways? And then it makes you think like, whoa, did I even if and when the rupture occurs? And if it's because of, you know, anti-racism work, and you know, there's a pattern, right? I've lived through this pattern so many times. So I'm going to stop saying if, it's when, because I know how inevitable it is. For me, at least, I'll just speak for myself, makes you go, whoa, I guess I didn't really know that person anyways. So then for me, I begin to grieve this relationship that I thought I had, you know? Because I would never enter knowingly into a relationship with someone who was not actively anti-racist. I always want to presume that people are doing the work. And, you know, you can quickly realize if they are or not. And for me, that isn't, you know, I don't sit down with people and have a formal interview. And, you know, it's so funny because like, that's so many of the questions, right? It's like, well, you read the books and you listen to the podcast, and then what do you do?
Part 2 of this episode will discuss how the fuck to engage in repair, so stay tuned to hear more soon.
If the Top Knot Squad's content makes you laugh, nod in agreement, or makes you feel less alone, we'd love your support in the cost of producing this podcast. Visit patreon.com/TopKnotSquad to learn more about our budget-friendly sponsorship tiers and how you can help ensure that TKS has a future. Every little bit helps.
If you like what you hear, then be sure to click the subscribe button in your podcast app. While you're there, leave us a review. You can find us on social media. Just search for Top Knot Squad. We welcome your feedback and love making new friends.